Thank you very much. I'd like to open the floor for questions. I'd like to start with Untitled Chapter.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. When you're looking in a port, usually the speed of loading, unloading containers is the essence. They should move lots of stock, containers and other material. And usually it's mechanical, I suppose, and it's anchored, and after it's unhooked automatically or by. And is this type of accident frequent, to your knowledge, in the ports? Because they handle thousands and thousands and thousands of containers. So I expect it was not necessarily the first, or I hope it's the last.
André Regimbal here. To our knowledge, this is the first incident that has been reported to the CNSC. But perhaps if I can ask the person from RSB Logistic to provide information about the number of such operations in the port.
Mr. Eckel, over to you.
George Eckel, RSB. We are told that it happens approximately once every 200,000 container moves, is the information we've been told at this time.
From whom? Who told you? Where is this information coming from?
This is information directly from the Port of Halifax.
So when you say, I don't know how many containers the Halifax port is handling, but if it's every 200,000, that means there is, I suppose they handle more than 200,000, so it's several times a year it happens. Do you have, independently on what was in this accident involved, it was hexafluoride, but for other material, do you have any maintenance, inspections, tests, and the frequency of procedure revisions?
I'm sorry, could you clarify the question? I guess we have regular maintenance, inspections, recertifications for our owned equipment, the flat rack. But as far as the port equipment, no, we do not.
Okay, it was mainly for port facilities because that's their equipment. It's not yours.
Yes, that's correct.
And you, to your knowledge, you don't know what's the procedures and what's the frequency of maintenance of this equipment.
We've asked for the maintenance records and service records of the equipment and are still waiting for that.
Okay. When you look, it's does the cargo hold contain only one or several layers of flat racks?
Several layers.
Could you tell me what's the maximum lift of container, more specifically flat racks, when loading on unloading? Because here it was a 7-meter drop into the vessel cargo hold on the other layer. Is it possible that at one point the potential drop will exceed 9 meters as you move it up and you move it to the dock, and that the potential drop will exceed 9 meters, therefore overpass the regulation designed drop limit?
If I could pass that question to one of my colleagues, Mr. Clausen, as far as the positioning of the containers on the vessel, he could comment on that.
At this time, I would not be able to give an exact answer on that because that's something I'm not familiar with. I'm not on the terminal. I don't know the operations of a terminal and the height that they lift. I have the same question, but at this time I don't have an answer.
Can I piggyback on this? What I'd like to know is whether there are specific instruction or regulation on uranium, on this particular material, that indicate to the Port Authority, thou shalt not lift this box above 9 meters? Is there such a regulatory or procedural requirement?
I will ask Mr. Sylvain Faye to provide information on that.
Sylvain Faye, for the record, actually the regulations don't require any, or there's no limitation on the height for the lifting. The regulations were designed for transport purposes, and the 9-meter drop, which is specified in the regulations for those packages, is to simulate a road accident at a certain speed. But the other important part is the target where the package has to be dropped onto, which is defined in the regulations as unyielding surface, which is extremely hard compared to road or even concrete. So there's some compensation there in terms of the drop height is 9 meters as a set level, but the surface onto what it has to be dropped onto is much more stronger in the regulation than what is happening in normal accidents. But to answer the question, there's no limit on the height when it's lifted. It's not 9 meters or anything like that.
Mr. Jesse?
So, because potentially what you are looking here, if it was not a last row, a bottom row of these flat racks, the drop could be higher than 9 meters. And when you lift it about the side of a ship and you move it, I think that it could be even higher. So I think we should look at what will happen if it's. We should review this. The other question is, could you compare the container certification? When you compare, we had a large accident in Eastern Townships where the train just blew up. And the question there was questioning the container's quality and resistance. So could you compare what's the certification of this hexafluoride containers versus railroad fuel and other liquid containers?
Yeah, Sylvain Faye, for the record, I don't have the exact information on to rail cars or tanker for other types of dangerous goods, but for the radioactive material, all the requirements are in the regulation, and like I said, they have to resist accident conditions, which is simulated by the 9-meter drop test that we just mentioned, which is one of the tests. And on top of that, they also have to withstand a thermal test for about 800 degrees Celsius for half an hour. And there's also immersion test following that. So there's design requirements in the regulation that each package that requires certification needs to meet before they are approved. And I'm not sure of the design requirements for rail cars or other package design for other dangerous goods.
I should note also, it's André de Gimbel here, that the UF6 itself is very different from the commodity that was transported involved in the Lac Mégantic accident. And I'll ask Mr. Michael Rinker to provide just an overview of the physical and chemical characteristics of UF6 as it is packaged.
Mike Rinker for the record. The Port Hope conversion facility makes a very similar product and stores it and transports it in similar ways. The product, UF6, once it cools to normal ambient temperature, is a solid. It's not flammable on its own. It's an oxidant, so it can make other things burn. But I guess one of the major risks for exposure to UF6 would be more of a chemical nature. Even the uranium itself is more of its risk is more of a heavy metal than it is from the dose perspective. And if it gets wet, then the fluoride can combine with water and other things and be quite corrosive to the skin. So its risks are associated more of a strong chemical hazard, but it is in the form that it's being transported in. It's in a solid form. So if the container were to break, it could be cleaned up. If it were to get wet, then it's a little bit more difficult.
These cylinders are not under pressure or under negative pressure.
Mike Ring, for the record, they're under negative pressure.
So if an accident happens, for any reasons, it could the containment could blow out. When I say blow out,
Actually, I think it's the opposite. If it was under positive pressure and it breached, it would blow up. Under negative pressure, it would be the opposite.
And these cylinders, what's the life of these cylinders, and what's the life of the overpacks, and how the overpacks are certified also, because we have a certification for these cylinders, but how is the overpacks are certified, and when you combine them, because that's when, when there is a drop, we could see what will happen.
Yeah, so if actually what is certified is the overpack with the cylinders. That's the package, and that is what is certified under the CNSC. The cylinders themselves also need to be approved under the NC standard, which is a different one, and that only combines for looking at the cylinders themselves. But on our end, we're looking at both the overpack plus the cylinder. That's the package, and that is the combination that we are certifying. And as part of that, they have regular maintenance done on those packages, including the cylinders and the overpack. And that is under regular maintenance. Perhaps RB Logistics could provide more information on actually the frequency of inspections.
And the certification process is a rigorous technical review of the design of the package and the cylinder, and the review is performed by accredited professional engineers at the CNSC who follow the ANSI review against their ANSI standard and other industry standard, and based on expert judgment.
Okay, there's going to be another round. So let's move on to Dr. McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can I just be clear about the sequence? The accident happened. The first responders would notify the company RSB and the CNSC, or did I hear that you said RSB was notified and then CNSC was notified?
Yeah, so I'm not sure exactly the exact order, but I know the first responders called Canutech, which is the service, emergency service from Transport Canada, and RSB Logistics was also notified. I'm not sure who was notified first on the two, but it was probably very close one to the other. From the CNSC, we were notified through the Transport Canada Canutech service, who have a direct line with our duty officer.
So there wouldn't be an expectation for a radioactive package that CNSC would be notified as one of the first people to be notified?
It could happen, but normally the first responders are trained when there is a transportation accident to contact Canutech first, and then Canutech would contact us, and this occurs very rapidly.
And the time between CNSC being notified and the inspector being on site was how long?
Just getting my notes. We were notified on the evening of Sylvain, Martin, can you? Okay, excuse me. Martin Thériault will provide the exact detail.
For the record, Martin Thériault, transport officer with CNSC. We were notified by Canutech through the duty officer on the Thursday evening at 10 o'clock, and was on site at 4 p.m. The following day. I was in Halifax.
That seems a long time.
The situation was under control through the night. The first responders established a safe perimeter around the vessel. At that point, it was difficult to see if there was any leakage from the containers, but the radiation level measured at 6 meters from the packages indicated that the radiation level was normal. Once we got in on the Friday morning, we organized ourselves to dispatch Mr. Thériault to Halifax, And the first flight that he could hop onto was at 1 p.m., I believe, or there around that time from Ottawa. So as soon as he got on site, then he immediately went to the port.
I still think, Mr. President, that seems a slow response time to get somebody from CNSC on site. I mean, it must have been possible for somebody to get there much sooner than that, flying through Toronto. I mean, there must be flights in the morning.
The situation assessed again was under control at the port. There was no indication of someone's life was at stake. We did our due diligence and obtained exactly the information and started to organize ourselves early on Friday morning. So by the time we organized the travel, as I said, from Ottawa, the first flight was at 1 p.m. to Halifax.
But you know that in the first few hours, there was a bit of misinformation that we were not sure whether there was a leak or not. And the dose reported or put a scare of people because they were talking about 4-time background, whatever that meant. So I think the question is, what would happen if how do you know it wasn't at that time something to worry about?
Perhaps I can clarify that we were assisting remotely from Ottawa early on. So we were providing assistance to the people on site who were conducting the first response. We would get worried if radiation levels were above what it would be normal for this type of transport, or if there was a spill, a confirmed spill. And as I said, we are involved early on to assist first responders until we organize ourselves to dispatch physically an inspector on the scene.
What?
Raul Awad, the Director General of Security and Safeguard. Since we've been informed at 10 p.m., at 10:15 there was a direct line with the first responder, what the measurement they took, and at that time we start assessing what kind of measurement and, if needed, immediate support to the first responder. And we contacted Mr. Theriault, and we're contacting the same time our inspectors in New Brunswick, in Saint Jean. And the choice was either we will send somebody from Saint Jean or from Ottawa, but due to the radiation level, which is very low, and the situation is totally under control, the decision was to ask Mr. Theriault to go the next day instead of sending during the night somebody from Saint Jean.
Thank you, Dr. McKeown. Okay, Ms. Velshi.
I've heard in the media that there have been similar incidents in the past, maybe one such incident in Halifax and perhaps something a bit more serious in the U.S. Can you provide some more details on that, please?
André Gimbal here. We're not aware of other similar incidents at the Port of Halifax. I'll have to examine or review the information that was published in the media. But to our knowledge, this is the first incident of this type that happened in any port in Canada.
Okay, so I heard there was something in the 1990s and then in the 1980s in the United States that was a little more serious. But maybe I'll pass on to Mark where I'd heard that, and maybe you can follow up on that.
But does RSB aware of any incident specifically on this type of shipment in the U.S. or anywhere else?
George Eckel, for the record. No, I am not aware of any similar incidents with similar cargoes.
Thank you. Ms. Velshi.
On slide 24, where you talk about how all the things worked. Have there been areas of improvement that you have identified, the things that could have worked better? We've heard about some early miscommunication, and it seems like there is still a bit of public angst about, was there a leak, why were the dose rates higher? So if you can maybe shed some light as to, what are some of the learnings from here, and how could things have been better communicated in particular?
We have scheduled a lessons learned meeting on April 4th with all those who were involved from the CNSC side, and we will be able to determine at that time what worked and what didn't work and what we can improve. So we can provide further information at a later time on that.
And so will RSB provide a report on this, is that correct?
Yes, RSB indicated to us that they would be submitting a report on April the 3rd.
You used new overpacks. Was that just a precautionary measure, or was there some evidence that the existing ones had been damaged?
For the record, I think the main reason was to also, there was some damage to the overpack, but they were not extensive damage. But the fact that some of the saddles were torn and things like that was much easier to bring in a new flat rat with new overpacks and make sure that everything was done that way. And also they could verify each cylinder before moving on to their final destination. It was as a precautionary measure.
Thank you. I'll come back in my second round.
Monsieur Hervé?
Well, just one question about the, you mentioned that the overpack has to meet the standard, and but what about the cylinder? I mean, even if the overpack, if we suppose the overpack broke at that time, this is not to say that there would be radiation. So the cylinder itself has a certain resistance, I suppose.
Yes, that is correct. There are some testing requirements for those cylinders in the NC standard, including some pressure testing, because they also have to meet the requirements for when they're being filled in a plant or when they're being emptied. So those ones, and they are also, and also the standard applies for when the cylinders are being manufactured and ensure that they would be safe to handle in a facility where they have to be lifted also, and as well as filled and emptied. But I can, I'll have to look into more details.
What could happen with the cylinder if you dropped it when trying to put it in the overpack, to insert it in the overpack? If you drop the cylinder, what could happen?
This is the loading in the overpack occurs within the facility. Mr. Rinker might have some additional information, or otherwise we would get back to you on that.
Mike Rinker, for the record, I have to get back to you on that one.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other question? Anybody else? Ms. Velshi?
You mentioned the first responders get trained. Who trains them?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Who trains the first responders?
We train the first responders for emergency, nuclear and radiological emergency. And we give the training for the first responder all across Canada under the CBRNE program, which is chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear program.
And they would be the ones responsible for measuring dose rates and communicating their findings?
That's correct.
So that will be part of your review as well, then, on how well that happened.
So just to conclude on this question, so are you happy with I think the first responder was the fire authority in the port, if I understand correctly. And those are the people we're talking about?
That's correct, yeah. The hazmat team at
Right, and I thought
Halifax
they did a good job on everything besides communicating with the press. So are you satisfied that they
Actually, they did exactly what we expect them to do. They are the first responder. They are the first to be on the scene of that accident, taking measurement and inform the authority.
I know, but I thought one of the first observation is to assess whether there is safety and risk to the public. And I don't think they've, in fact, everything they've said about the dose and the hazard was not, let's put it this way, assuring the public when they didn't have all the information.
Actually, when they give to the media, they give it as relative to the background radiation, which is not the right way to do it. And that's something we need to maybe adjust in our training.
My last question was around port operations. In slide 25, you say it was perfectly safe to work around the packages, and this determination was made when the inspector went on site the next day. So why did it take the port a couple more days before it resumed operations?
Martin Thériault, for the record. The decision was made by the terminal authority or terminal operator based on the assessment done by the radiation expert that was hired by them. So they wanted him to confirm that no level of radiation were detected on the surface of the container. And that's when they had sufficient insurance that there were no loose contamination on the surface of the container. And also they wanted to safely remove the container from the cargo hold before to resume operation, because it was still a small risk of an incident happening, because the cylinder were not affixed the way they were normally be affixed to the container, to the flat rack. So they want to mitigate the risk having less people go around when there's still an emergency, an incident scene on board the ship.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. McKeown.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a question of naivety, so please bear with me on slide 7 and slide 21. I think I'll refer to as well. If I understand it correctly, the package is put on the flat rack, and the flat rack is what is installed in the hold?
Yes, that's correct.
Is the package bolted to the flat rack? Because in slide 21 it looks as if with the fall they've all rolled off and down towards one end.
Yes, it is bolted to the flat rack. We have pictures of that. Apologies, we didn't include them in here. But perhaps Mr. Fay or RSB Logistic can add further detail.
So did the bolts hold?
Yes, it has to be securely bolted to the flat rack. As you can see on the top picture on slide 7, you see the supporting things there. So the base of those supporting racks are bolted onto the flat rack base.
So in slide 21, where you see the package, that is still bolted to the base of the flat rack?
Yes, correctly.
Okay. So just intuitively, would it not be safer and more consistent for the flat rack to be in a container? I mean, I just happened to be watching some containers being removed from ships the other day. I was on vacation in good sight of this. They're taken a long way in the air. There's a very, very rapid turnaround, and clearly speed is the whole purpose of this. Doesn't it add a risk just to have the flat rack bolted onto the crane? Wouldn't it be safer and more reassuring if the flat rack was in a container, because then you've got continuity of process for the port operator? That's a naive question born of process ignorance. But
maybe RSB can shed a light on this.
George Eckel for the record. Just to clarify, a flat rack basically is a shipping container, same as a sealed container. It just simply has no roof or no sides. And the reason they select a flat rack is simply for access, for loading the cylinders and things like that. But it has the identical anchor points, top and bottom, same dimensions as a closed sea container, if that answers your question.
thank you. And presumably, anytime a flat rack is loaded, it would always be in the hold. It wouldn't be above the level of the deck.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Monsieur Hervé?
I had a question. I don't know if you just answered, just asked that question at the end, but my question was, is there any indication where to place the flat rack in the boat? It has to go in the hold, or it could be placed on the deck, anywhere on the boat?
I think we just got the answer that it is in the hull. That's what they said.
Is it an obligation to?
There is no requirement in our regulations to that effect, but perhaps the licensee can provide information.
RSB?
Yes, or George Eckel for the record, they are always in the hold. It's a commitment from the ship lines to do that.
And you can and you can have 2 or 3 flat racks, one over the other.
Typically, there is separation between these flat racks or containers of other cargoes in between each one. They're not typically put together.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? You did say you're going to do kind of a lesson learned report on all of this, so we look forward to reading that. The good news was that there was no leak and there was no breach. But what the concern is, we always like to ask the what if question. If there were, what would we expect a different behavior here? So we look forward to reading this. Thank you. I'd like to take a 10-minute break now, and so we'll reconvene at 11 o'clock. Thank you.